And I just turned around and I hauled ass out of there. I was done. I wasn't dealing with that.
The hypocrisy of the cult is one of the things that turned me away the quickest.
When I turned my headlights on, it turned and looked at us. And one of the things I remember the most were the eyes were glowing red.
I see an orb of light. It is just circling these steps like it is waiting for me.
And he begins to tell them that he saw a UFO. They're basically like, what are you talking about? That's 7 foot up on a tree, peeking around it, and that's where I saw the top of the muzzle, nose, and the eyes. As soon as I made eye contact with this thing, it felt like death.
Welcome back to Tinfoil Tales. I'm your host, Brandon Wright. Tonight's episode, we're going to be joined by my guest, Olivia James. Olivia reached out to me with some information regarding some of her past lives and some of the books she's written based on it. Deals with MK Ultra and mind control and some other aspects that I was not expecting. Olivia believes that she is a reborn dark entity, basically a demon in a past life. She still communicates with them too. She also communicates with other beings and allows them to channel through her. So it's definitely an interesting topic. But before we bring Olivia on, if you would like to be a guest on Tinfoil Tales, there's a couple things you can do. You can send an email to tinfoiltalespodcast@gmail.com, or you can go to tinfoiltales.com and go to the contact section. Either way works for me. Just make sure to reach out and we will get something scheduled for a future episode. If you would like to help the podcast, you can share it around. Word of mouth helps the podcast grow and find potential new guests. So that is the best way to help me if you can. You can also leave a 5-star rating and review wherever you listen to the podcast at. It helps with the rankings and makes the podcast more discoverable. You can also become a member of the Patreon. For $1.99 a month, you get early access to all the episodes up to 2 months early, and they're all ad-free. I personally do not like the ads on my podcast, but it's kind of how I have to pay the bills around here, so there is the option of joining the Patreon and not having to listen to ads anymore. You can also follow me around on all the social medias. And if you're interested in some Tinfoil Tales wares, I do have hats and shirts and stickers and other things available for anyone that would be interested. Just make sure to reach out to me and I can get some to you. We're going to go ahead now and bring on Olivia and dive into the conversation. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. I'd like to take this time to welcome my guest tonight, Olivia James. Thanks for coming on here and talking to me.
Thank you for having me.
Would you like to let the audience know a little bit about yourself?
Sure. My name's Olivia James. I have 2 books. They're called the Gray Mouse series, and one is called Gray Mouse Sex, Space, and Mind Control. And my newest one is called Gray Mouse Purgatory. And it delves into a lot about MK Ultra, conspiracy, the paranormal, and even occult.
How did you come about writing stuff like this? Like, was there something that kind of put you on this pathway of...
Yes. Yes. So as I went through my healing process, I found writing to be very therapeutic and to, be able to get out everything that I was experiencing and putting it into words has been like the best experience. And also I'm able to give that information to other people.
Do you have experiences from any of this, or like, how does that fall into what the books are, like with the topics of the books?
The books are pretty much exactly what I was experiencing. I actually did a lot of work. I've been learning, so I started off doing a lot of hypnotic regression with various hypnotherapists. I found a really good one, and then I also started working on. That's where some of my abilities came back to the forefront, and I learned how to do astral traveling, bilocation, remote viewing, which I call psi remote viewing because it's just not, I'm not doing a scientific process where I'm using coordinates. It's actually a psychic ability. And I also do something called hosting. And actually, spirits and entities taught me that word. They told me what I was doing was hosting. So it's a new kind of fresh way to describe it. It's not exactly channeling because I'm not just using words through my mouth. I'm letting an entire being or person take over my body and speak. So when they're inside my body, I'm pretty much like in a, warm, dark place, just resting while they do it. And I don't feel any pain. I don't get any psychological or physical trauma. So I always say I don't recommend it to other people because it's specific to me. It's an ability I have. So I wouldn't recommend other people try to do this hosting.
Yeah. I'm not really familiar with any of that type of stuff. I've talked with people that have had like these experiences and everything else, but I've never heard the term hosting before, so that's new to me.
Yeah, and I had never heard it before either, before actually a demon named Bacchus told me that's what I do. So it was really interesting to get information, specifically from an entity saying I'm what I am called is a host, a spirit host, entity host.
Well, if you want to start from the beginning, how all
Yes,
this happened, I'm going to turn it over to you and we can just dive on into it.
sure. Okay, so I always like to start off with my introduction, and that is I always say that I had very interesting parents. So going all the way back to childhood, my parents they had they struggled a lot, but my father was recruited at a very young age, 18 years old, from a small town to do military intelligence on the German-Russian border. So he spoke German and he was a code breaker and doing things like that. So it was really strange to have somebody, some poor kid from a small town be recruited straight out of high school for that. And when he was done, he came back, to from where he was living at, and he got into some kind of rougher type activities. He started working for, you know, the what we call now cartels. So, and if anybody knows about, the drug trafficking trade in the, 60s and 70s, there's a lot of information about out there about, different agencies, three-letter agencies that were involved in, pushing that along. So it wasn't just this one group, being on top. There was a lot of different hands involved in drug trafficking. And he ended up being a major drug trafficker in the 60s and 70s. And he was doing things, with plane, with boat, car, bus, but mainly by driving. Um, so he was doing a lot of that work, and my mom actually helped him do some of that work. They were doing a lot of smuggling and money laundering, that kind of thing. But why that's important is because of his ties to the different, coming out of military intelligence and being tied to, different agencies. He ended up becoming a risk because he got addicted to his own product. So these people started seeing him more as a risk rather than, a successful asset. So what they did was they were trying to scare him a little bit, and they were doing like these, kind of like semi raids. They would, almost trying to scare him straight. And it didn't work. How he just couldn't, get himself together. So
Hmm.
on the second or third raid, they finally actually took him into custody, arrested him and everything. And there was this huge public trial. It was always in the newspapers and things back then. But, it looked like he was going to be going to prison for life for a really long time based on the amount of trafficking he was doing. So it was pretty serious situation. And at the end of the trial, they just dismissed everything, no matter how much evidence they had. And all they said was they had the wrong person. And they ended up giving him like a government job. So it's really strange to, have, all that happen. And at the end, they're just like, oh, never mind. We have the wrong person. It was the wrong name or something after this huge, long public trial. And I don't think anybody put two and two together based on that. So it was really interesting. But what I found out through my own research, through my own, regressions and things like that, I found, and I want to talk about how I can get information. Like I said, I do things called hosting. So that means I can talk to not only just dead people, but people that are living in terms, I do something where I describe it as talking to someone's brain. So it's just talking to different parts of them. I can talk to a different part of their personality, their spirit, their higher self, like maybe like a heart center. There's so many different areas of a person to connect to. And you connect to different parts of their personality, sometimes even an alter in them. So that's kind of how I was able to obtain, expanded information about this is because my father's dead. He's been dead for a long time, but that's how I got the information, is doing this work and hosting him myself. And actually he became, he's almost like a guide to me now. Like if I try to go very deep and travel to the outer realms, he's one of the first people that steps over the line to greet me, almost like keeping an eye on me now, because we were estranged pretty much for my whole life. We didn't vibe on a lot of things. And now I know why, is because a lot of it was his guilt. A lot of it was his own personality about, what had happened to me. And it was because in order to stay out of prison, he had to sign something over. And that means saving his own, behind by signing me over to them. So that's how I got introduced into MK Ultra, is from his cowardice of not wanting to go to prison. So when he got out of that and just started working, he tried to live a normal life. It was pretty normal, but I ended up getting taken to what I remember as a psychiatric hospital. And I was only about, I don't know, 6 or 7. And I think when I was a really young kid, I barely talked. I rarely ever talked. I was very quiet, very shy, very introverted, that type. So at this particular, and I don't know how I went to this place and they didn't remember. I've asked one of my living parents, do they remember me ever leaving, at night or being gone? And all they said was, it's possible. So that's not really a definitive answer. It's saying,
Yeah.
did you know where I was every day at 6 years old? She just said it's possible that I was gone. And I don't, there's no other way to figure that out. But from what I've discovered is that I was taken to a psychiatric hospital on the East Coast. And this place is no longer open. But at the time, it was this big, huge, massive place. They were pretty much self-sustaining, and we were in like a very small wing, a separate wing, because there was a very small program. And it was me and another child who was a boy. His name was Jacob. So it was just us two. And the main programmer was a female. And I always describe her because I can still see her in my mind the way she looked. And she looked, and I didn't grow up around these types of people, like my parents are drug traffickers. So to see somebody like her, she seemed very kind of like ethereal in a way. She was always very dressed up and, her hair pinned up just perfectly, the psychiatrist. So I always kind of looked up to her as like I don't know, like just like it was so weird to see somebody like that. I hadn't had that in my experience as a child. But she also had two assistants, and what we used to call them orderlies, but now, they have different terms for it, nursing assistants and that. But these two orderlies were doing a lot of the processes and practices that she wanted implemented. So what she wanted ultimately, her main goal in this program was to create something called syncopated dissociation between me and this other child. And what that would consist of is systematic abuse, torture, psychological manipulation, things like that. They were doing that pretty regularly. And I want to say they were changing activities probably every 15 to 20 minutes from what I can remember. And it was, one, they would start off maybe, making us watch certain images on a screen. They were, coming and doing a little bit of physical abuse, and then they would switch over and take us to do, some other things in with the psychiatrist, like hypnosis. She was doing hypnosis on us very young. She was also using LSD and electroshock therapy. So they were doing all these different activities. There were some sexual activities. There was a lot of psychological, manipulation. So us as children, we never knew what to expect. And that was the point. They were trying to break down the psyche and to really make you go back to a base state. And it really does happen when you're constantly being abused and tortured as a child. You kind of leave that behind. And we got to a point where we didn't ask for anything. We didn't ask to use the bathroom. We didn't ask for food. They would hold food away from us and water and things like that. But that's what they wanted. That was their process, to get you to a point where you never asked for anything. That's what they wanted. They wanted a blank slate. They wanted to create these kind of like open pockets in your brain, compartmentalize you so that they could rebuild you into what they wanted. And that was kind of what they wanted to do, is rebuild us. And they considered us successful because we were able to dissociate so well because of the trauma. Pretty much our spirits wanted to leave the body. It's in a way to escape the pain and the suffering. And that's what we did as children. And I remember, the only time that me and this boy Jacob could be little kids is when we would dissociate and we would leave the body. We would see each other and if somebody could look into that realm, they could see us playing. That was the only time when our bodies were laying in a bed being electroshocked or things like that. We would be playing in our spirit form together. That was the only time we could be children. So what she was just making a lot of discoveries, I believe, with hypnosis. And it was, I think we were both going so deep. She was finding things she didn't know she could find. That's how I felt. Like she was finding things that she had no idea that were going to be there, none whatsoever. And so she was doing a lot of these where she was looking for, where she found past lives of mine. And that's kind of how I got referred out to other programs based on what she was finding within my own mind and my own spirit. She was finding things that, other people wouldn't realize. So I was going to talk about some of the past lives I was able to discover and how it became that she decided to choose me for these other programs because of these past lives. So the main past life that she really focused on was in ancient times. I was something what they would call like dark entity, something like that. I was more of a dark jinn named Harlowen. So this particular jinn, what she would do is, and this was ancient times, she would kind of stalk someone. She might find somebody, out, walking their sheep outside of a village or something, and, pretty much try to infiltrate their life and begin that oppression, that process for, almost breaking them down and, waiting for them to be so terrified and so stressed out that they would allow this being to take over their bodies. And that was what she wanted. And once she was allowed to take over their body, then she could begin her work of, destroying that person in whatever way she could, mainly making them hurt themselves or someone else, pretty much destroying their life, everything they had. So that's what something that a dark jinn would do. And when she was well, I'm saying she, but me, when I was a jinn, I didn't really take a very physical form because physicality for entities and dark entities is very difficult to express. We much rather travel in our energetic form because it's very easy to travel. And when I was a jinn, I like to travel through the blood like a virus. So I would be, I don't know, I guess something more of a parasitical entity because that's how I traveled and that's how I was able to sustain myself for so many thousands of years is by doing the same process, finding someone new every time once I had destroyed that person. And that's how I lived, that's how I fed. And I did that for a lot of years until I decided to try something else. But what was really interesting is this being, she didn't know that she was evil. Because she didn't know what evil meant. She just knew what she was. She just knew she was a jinn and that her brothers were the jinn. And she didn't think she was evil. When I speak to that part of myself, she thinks that she thought she was doing what these people wanted to. She thought that they called to her to take over them and called to her to, take over their mind and body and soul. She thought that's what they wanted. So she thought she was doing something good. She had no idea that there was a concept of evil because she didn't consider herself evil. She just was what she was kind of thing. So that was one of the main past lives that they wanted to kind of, I don't know, exploit in a way. There was another one that they also saw that it's almost like foreshadowing of what I would be able to do in the future. It was in Italy, and I was what they would consider like psychic medium in Italy, and this was like in the 1400s. And I was pretty well known in this particular village because, I thought I was out to help people. I wanted to help people connect with their past loved ones and things like that. And they would trade me for, vegetables and other goods they would give me if I was doing this for them. So I was pretty much a medium then. And the Inquisition came to that town, and they found out, somebody told them, who I was and what I was doing, and they ended up coming to, my house, and they punched me in the face, they attacked me, and they dragged me back to this dungeon where they continued to do like their particular torture. Now, they hung me from a ceiling, so a lot of the torture, happened while I was being hung from a ceiling by my arms. And I remember my uncle, I had two children, and my husband had passed a long time before that, particular incident, but my uncle had taken my two children, and he brought them to this dungeon one day, and there was a really small little opening in the dungeon where they could see me, and he wanted just to see me one last time, but I wish he wouldn't have done that because I was like almost on the verge of death, and it was probably nightmarish for these two kids to even see me like this. So I thought that, we all think that everybody's being burned at the stake, but I actually died from dehydration and starvation, and I really didn't have any feeling left in my arms at that point. And I was so angry. I remember that anger, that feeling of, wanting something bad to happen to all these people and what they did. And I really had that anger for men in that life. And, I reached out, I called out to everything that could help me, anything. And I feel like I attached, some darkness to me then because I wanted anything that would answer, to come and, take care of these people who had done this to me and other women there. But, and then there was one other life that it was about the, I want to say late 1700s, early 1800s. And I was a male in that life. And I had been on my own for a really long time. My parents had died young, and I had almost lived like as a street child. And I had been, traveling village to village for a long time. And as I grew into adulthood, I found somebody that I could, like a traveling companion that had the same, I don't know, desires inside them. We were able to connect on that way. And what we would be called, I guess we would be called, I don't know, we would find somebody, in these villages as we traveled, we would find some woman alone and attack her, and she would meet her end, and we would just leave her out in the fields or whatever. And we would do that. We just did that every time we went to a new village or a new city. We would do the same thing over and over. It was like there was something just dark inside us. And we would do that all the time. But there was this one time we went to a new village, and I think we had become very careless and very arrogant in what we were doing. So we had just found someone, and in those times, a lot of women were out just, taking care of the fields and doing work outside. So we found someone that was on her own, and we attacked her and left her. And the villagers found out. And we had been to a local pub just drinking and laughing and giggling and all that kind of stuff. And they knew it had to be us because we were the only new people in the town, and there hadn't been anything happening like that forever. So they pretty much assumed it was us, and we had to run. And we ran, and we were hiding in this barn, and we thought we'd be safe there. But no, they found us, they locked us in, and they set the barn on fire. I only remember at the last minute, I was trying to crawl up, climb up higher into the rafters to get away from the fire. But obviously, we burned alive, and we deserved it. We deserved that treatment in that life. And I had one more life that I thought was important too, and just because the fact that it contributed to like kind of like my mindset. And it was and I don't know the time frame of it. It was kind of ancient, but it was in Egypt. It looked like Egypt anyway. I don't know the exact name of it. I don't think we called it Egypt then. And I know I was a male, and I was what would be considered like a slave, and there was hundreds of people just moving sand, and none of us looked at each other. We were like, I don't know what the word would be, like automatons or something. We all just had this blank stare, and we all just kept walking, moving sand, all of us. Nobody talked, nobody interacted, nothing. It was just all work. And if I could look and see, there's this huge being standing over everyone, and it was just one of them. And he would look like what we consider, somebody that looked like Anubis. So I called them the dog people, though. I didn't have a word for them. And we thought that he had killed our god because our god was a crocodile. And so we were pretty much infiltrated and taken over because we thought he killed our God, because our present God was a crocodile. And he just made us constantly work. And you can imagine how strong these beings are if one of these can command, hundreds, almost thousands of people just to do work, just from one being. And he carried like a staff that had power. And I remember I was in a regression viewing this scene with a hypnotherapist. And what was crazy is that there was no time there was no time. The limits of time had fallen away when you get into these different realms and these different higher states of consciousness. So I was there seeing him, talking to him, and he saw me. And the only thing he said when he spoke is he said, "Get back to work." That's it. And he could see me in present time laying in the bed, talking about this and doing this. And all he said was, "Get back to work." So these lives are what kind of got me, I guess, referred to another program. So the psychiatrist at this hospital, like I said, I was only like 6 or 7. She referred me out to this gentleman, an older gentleman. So I went to his office and he had a very like neutral toned office. I didn't it did to me it didn't look like a doctor's office. That's why it was kind of strange to be there. And when I got there, it was a very elderly gentleman, very frail looking, I don't know, maybe 80s, early 90s. I couldn't tell. And he was balding and he had these really small wire rimmed glasses on. And, his name was Dr. Green. And I don't know for sure. I only know him as Dr. Green, but a lot of people say that Dr. Green was an alternate name for what they consider somebody named Mengele. And I don't know that. I only remember what he looked like and that he was called Dr. Green. So he had 2 people there and they were twins. And he wanted them to examine me because I had been referred to him as kind of like a special, case. So he had these 2 twins and they were adults and they were kind of like, I don't know, very light, pale colored, almost like an albino condition. And so what they were doing in this examination, they weren't doctors, but they were like opening my eyes, looking in my ears, and they finally were like looking in my mouth. They made me open my mouth and say, ah, and I did everything they said. And when they looked at my mouth, they turned to Dr. Green and they said, yes, we found it. We can see the thing inside her. So, but what they were wrong about is that they thought they saw kind of like, I don't know, I guess an attachment. And that was something that this project was trying to harness because there's a lot of power in the dark side. And they thought that I was possessed in a way. They were trying to target, possessed children, possessed people to try to, almost capture that strength of like these entities that were trying to take over other people. And they called it Project Traveler. So that's what he was doing, is trying to capture that, learn about that, make it scientific in a way. But they were wrong because they thought it was something they could remove from me maybe or control, and they couldn't because whatever they were seeing inside me, they were seeing my old dark Jinn self. And that's not something I can erase because it's just part of me at my cellular level. I can't erase past lives. I can't do anything like that. I can't eliminate it. So they were kind of, off. And I didn't feel harmed by Dr. Green. I want to say that like, people, he has this crazy reputation, but he didn't harm me. But let me tell you, when being around him, you do feel very much on edge. And I always describe it like saying he was very old and very frail, but I felt when I was around him, I felt like I was in a cage with a tiger. Like just that feeling of dread, like something he's not to be messed with type. So that was part of my upbringing and how I got into the MK Ultra and how they found some of these, abilities in me or, what they could, foster in me and return myself almost to like a previous, state in a way, to bring these old abilities back out into me. And I really didn't know I could do all this stuff until, just about, I think about 4 years ago, or maybe 5 years ago now, I just started to have, these kind of things returning, to my life and knowing that I can do it.
I was actually getting ready to ask you, when did you start discovering this? So,
Yeah. So I started discovering it. I was having a lot of, and like I said, I didn't know I could do these things. And, me, I'm not, I don't consider myself brave. My whole life I've been terrified of, the dark, paranormal, occult, all of that stuff. It was very scary to me. I just wasn't somebody that was brave enough to kind of face that. And now I kind of can see why, because of some of the stuff that happened to me as a kid and that I had suppressed for so long. And, just being, anybody, if you said, if I tell people, I can actually let a demon take over my body, how does that sound? And, it sounds insane and sounds like who would do that? Who would be brave enough to do that? I definitely wasn't somebody that thought I could do that. So I was having, from what, okay, so ties into part of the other part of it. I had gotten this job and it was I think about 6 years ago now, 5 or 6 years ago, I had gotten a new job and it was a professional kind of like office job, human resources type. And I was just having constant like anxiety and panic attacks with this job. Nothing about it could get me to calm down. And I thought there was something wrong with me. I had no clue what was wrong with me, but every day it was just, crying, there's tears, and it's just not an environment where I should be doing that. And I just knew something was wrong with me. And I felt like kind of like this push, like something was pushing me to try this. And I had never tried it before. I never thought about hypnosis or hypnotic regression, but I've just felt like something was like kind of behind me, kind of cheering me on to try this. And so I did, and I had to do it like in one week, and I had to find somebody literally, I got to do it now kind of thing. And it was really strange to be able to find somebody that would do it like within, a day of asking them. So when I ended up doing this, I it was crazy that I ended up going under for almost 6 hours. And I didn't even know that I could even go that deep, And I was saying the most outrageous things, stuff that I would never, expect myself to say. Never, And there was demons speaking through me, aliens, animals, past lives, ghosts, discarnates, like anything you can think of was like just rushing to talk through me. And I was literally under hypnosis for almost 6 hours. And when I came out of it, I just was mind blown. Like, I can't believe it. I can't believe I said all this stuff. It was really strange to me. So I tried to, that's when I started kind of looking into kind of a lot of the stuff I said, like, how, where did this come from? I was starting to talk about, you know, memory suppression technology. I was talking like that in this session, like, very formal and very like the words were coming out. And it was really strange how my voice changes throughout the entire 6 hours, with yes, different people took over, my voice changes, it was so interesting. So that's kind of how I got started doing the hypnosis. And then I think this kind of validates not just me and my story, but other hypnotherapists. I used probably like 5 or 6 people at least by now, almost 7 people to make, I want them to, be validated for people to know that nobody is coaching me to say things. I have everything recorded. I have everything transcript, so there was nobody coaching me. I pretty much, all they have to do is count me down and watch me. And I pretty much speak on my own the whole time because it's always something trying to enter my body and, talk. And the first people that shove everybody out of line is demonic entities because, and I'm just saying this, everybody gets mad when I say this, but I say it's because they consider themselves gods. I'm not saying I consider them gods. They consider themselves that. And, because I was a jinn, yes, jinn do consider themselves God. That's just how they talk. I'm not saying it's true or not true. That's just the way they speak. They consider themselves like trickster gods. So that's why they push everyone to the side. And, sometimes if I go under hypnosis or start even getting to a meditative state, the demonic entities are the first ones to kind of show up. And they told me it's because when I start to, shift into a different state of consciousness and I start to do this, because I go so deep that it's like they're in complete darkness and they see like this light starting to shine and then they know it's me and they kind of like rush. So that kind of is how they know it's me. And then it's almost like having like this big line of people waiting to speak. And whoever, who gets to be in the front of the line, it's usually them because, they're kind of like the tough guys in the area. So they get the chance to speak first. And usually when they speak, I let them just say what they need to say. And it doesn't scare me because it's so weird to say that it doesn't scare me because, some of the stuff they say is could be terrifying to other people. Just me talking about it scares other people. So I totally understand if people get afraid of it. I understand. Imagine how I felt when I started doing it. I didn't know I could do this kind of thing, and it would never be something that I would pursue because I was terrified of it. But now that I've gotten so much information from all different types of entities and letting them speak and say stuff that, we would never know if I wasn't allowing them to say this through me. We would never have this information because I don't think anybody has the balls to do it. It's a little bit scary for everybody. So,
I have a question before we
sure.
get going. So when these things are speaking and want you to speak for them,
hmm
how do you know what they're saying is truthful?
I guess because I don't judge it by truth. I let them just speak plainly. I don't say they're lying or not lying because then I could say that about any being that came forward, my
Hmm.
father or anybody else. And when I'm doing this, I'm in my highest state of consciousness. That's what allows me to do this. So there's no tricking me, there's no fooling me. I never feel fooled or tricked like that because it's my most highest self. The strongest part of me is doing this. So, and it's not just darker entities that I've been able to do this with. I've been able to let very, what do you call it? I don't want to say famous, big time religious figures spoke through me. Um, and that was amazing. I let Source speak through me. That was probably my favorite thing that I've ever done is that, and very much energy filled. So, I don't want people to think that I'm just like calling demons. I'm allowing myself to be open to anything to get information for other people to come and speak through me. So, do people try to say deceitful things? The ones that I find to be most deceitful are humans, which is really interesting. The people that have tried to be most deceitful and try to talk the most crap and really try to harm is other humans that I've tried to connect with and kind of speak to, like handlers. There's a big group of handlers that I've been able to get information from about how, and they really look really interesting because when I saw them, these are people sitting behind computers. It's that term, the guy behind the chair, that guy that's in the chair, that's them. They're
Hmm.
not like as scary as we think, because they're doing all this horrible stuff to people, they're targeting people and doing this and monitoring people, but they really are these, kind of geeks behind the computers because I've seen them. I've walked up right behind them in, an astral state and I've seen what they're typing and everything. These are people on computers. So as scary as we thought they were, they're just nerds behind a computer.
I always crack up when someone says nerd. I don't know why. It's still just funny to me.
Do you want me to keep going or?
Yeah, you can keep going.
Okay. So I got taken into, like I said, I got taken into the program and they were doing a lot of different experiments, seeing what they could accomplish with that. And a lot of one of the experiments were they had me sit in this sensory deprivation, but it wasn't water or anything. It was just a dark room. They had me in a dark room. They had me, tied to a chair, like a regular chair, and there was no light, anything in there. They didn't give me any food. They hooked me up to an IV and they wanted me to do this hosting thing. So, literally all they have to do is count me down and put me in a trance. And, at then obviously, so a lot of people would find that difficult to think of, like they're just counting you down and you're in trance. Yes, because I can do it now, and that's how I do it now. So it's basically a counting measure, and I can travel. So I was doing that as a child, and they wanted me to host these demonic entities, and they were trying to see if they could make measurements out of it. Measurements of the body systems, brainwave scans, whatever was happening to my body. They wanted to see how that would be affected by having these entities within my body. And they weren't feeding me. They weren't. There was no hugs, no, I'm just a little kid, and they're, treating me like this. And I found it very conflicting that these humans at this place were torturing me, all different types of ways. And it was entities that were keeping me alive. They were the ones that were sustaining me while I was in the chair because I didn't need to eat. while they were, taking over my body. And I still find that kind of strange because I'm supposed to hate them and, think they're evil and all that, but they were the ones keeping me alive while humans were torturing me. So you can see that can be conflicting to any child, it was probably, and it's still conflicting to me a little bit just to think, I'm supposed to hate all these people and hate all these beings, but it was actually humans that, started this whole process. So I was in a couple of those programs for a while. They were doing experiments, and as a child, they had us doing kind of, I don't want to talk, there's more gory details in the book, I guess I don't have to go into too much of that. What we call like monarch training, they sexualize children in a certain way to do various jobs. There's more in the book about that. I don't have to talk about it too much here, but there was some of that going on. And when I was 13, they decided to kind of switch gears. And from the abilities that had kind of arisen in me, they decided that I would get more training in a different place. And they thought that I would be good for something else. And that was like personality profiling. So from what I remember, I was with this, I don't know, kind of like an older gentleman, and he was kind of dressed up in a suit and he had like a hat on. And I was 13, but I looked like I was 9. I was very small and I looked very young. I didn't look like a 13-year-old. So he took me with him and it looked like we had gotten on a train or a subway or something like that. I didn't ask questions. You're not allowed to ask questions. So I didn't. And wherever he took me, we ended up on the moon. And I know it sounds crazy, but there are bases on both the moon and Mars. And on this base, there's an underground base, and I can't remember the level. I'm not sure if it was level 4 underground, but what they wanted me to do was participate in a training class called psionics. And I remember the teacher there, and I remember having a really hard time in this class because I was the only kid, and the rest of it was adults. And, their abilities weren't like I was used to. They had other abilities, like I just didn't understand what they were going to do with them. Like one gentleman, he had an ability where he could produce excess moisture in the body, which I thought that sounded kind of weird, but it looked like it was just leaking from his fingers, but I don't know what they were going to do with that. And then there was other people that were telepaths, energy readers, things like that. And like I said, my teacher, she was younger. To me, she looked young, but she acted way much older. She looked like she was in her 20s, but she acted like she was in her 60s or something like that's the feeling I get from her. It's more like a 60-year-old. But she was very stern with me. And at the time, I didn't take it well, but now I can see that she was trying to help me stay alive. And I remember the one phrase she always told me. She always said, one look, one word. She said, I have to be able to read the room and read each person with just one look or one word, because she knew that if I was going to be doing this work, I had to be quick, I had to be thorough, because some of it was going to be used in dangerous situations like corporate espionage and things like that. I had to be as fast as I could be. You have to walk in a room, shake one person's hand, and know if they're a threat or not. That's how detailed you have to be with personality profiling. So I got trained there for about, I think, I want to say 6 months or so. And I always remember that there was a poster on the wall in our classroom. We had one classroom, and it looked like there was no windows, obviously, because it was underground, but it looked like like an old college classroom. And like I said, that I was the only kid there. But I remember on the wall there was a poster for a general named General Land, and he was going to be retiring after 20 years of service. So it was really weird that I always remember that, seeing that one poster on the wall. And it was class every day, and then you would just go back to your dorm, sleep, wake up, go to class constantly. So they really couldn't use me for personality profiling until I was older. And so when I was older, I got into a lot of and all of these activities are forced. I just want people to know none of these are by choice or consent. It's all forced consent and forced by threat. So if you don't do what they say, you're going to be either dead or harmed, or someone you know is. So you have to continue doing all these processes and all these jobs and missions that they want you to do no matter what. So they had us doing up until like kind of like my late teens and early 20s, they had us doing like I call it beta tracking work. And it's a pretty much what some people would consider like Black Widow training or something or programming. That's how they would program some of our altars. I forgot to talk about that. When I was in the psychiatric hospital, they ended up creating 118 altars inside me, which that means there's 118 different personalities, and in which there were about six of the front altars that were the main altars that were doing the portions of most of the work, and the rest were probably like shifting altars. So these are some of the altars that were programmed to do these various jobs. There was an altar that did personality profiling. There was an altar that was a monarch altar that was more sexualized. There was an altar that did beta tracking, and she mixed that with, the personality profiling. And then there was a gray mouse altar, and that gray mouse altar is the one that did a lot of the corporate espionage work and trying to get in and out of buildings very quickly, that kind of thing. So after I was doing beta tracking work, like I explained, this is something where you're infiltrating, you have a mark, they give you a job, and that we call people the mark. If there's a specific person, you have to kind of infiltrate their lives, and pretty much you're recording. One of my altars has a photographic memory. So if all I have to do is be around this person, and it's recording in my mind the things that I see, the things that I hear. So if somebody, and sometimes I won't know the information because it's so far deep in my mind, but if someone were to put me under hypnosis, they could go in there, and use a code or something like that to get that information. That's how they hide information nowadays. Just like thinking about some of these people that are doing I don't know, different acts. Let's just say they're doing things that harm quite a few people in our country, and then you see them on the news and they look like they're like in shock, like they had no idea what was going on, or they don't know why they did certain things. Sometimes you're programmed to do certain things and you won't remember because that information is so far deep in your mind. It would take like something like hypnosis or code, a code breaking event to try to, split that open to get that information. And they do that purposely for, you know, things like interrogation. So if somebody were to do something bad, if they get caught, they could never say who told them to do this, how it happened, how it got started. They would not even know. It would just be shut off way back deep into an altar. So that becomes how they, use different people as assets and things like that. So I have been doing, I was doing beta tracking work for quite a while and getting involved with different people. Like I started relationships when they told me to. I ended them when they told me to. I did whatever they said, basically. And I was working for a couple of different agencies. Um, that were some of these agencies, they consider themselves, good white hats or alliance. But in my experience, they're not. They're not good people. And yeah, how can you be if you're using abused children, you're recruiting them, and you're forcing them to do work for you, and dangerous work, and bad things. It's not anything good. None of us, to me, I don't consider any of us that did that kind of stuff. We're not heroes, they're making us do bad things, or else we're hurt. So after I went through that for a long time. I ended up getting promotion, and they said it was promotion for a job well done. They considered me a perfect, almost perfect asset because I did everything they said. I'd never questioned them. That's how we were trained to do everything they said. And so they ended up giving me a job on Mars. And this job on Mars was for personality profiling. I was going to be working in the corporate sector doing human resources work. And so this particular base that I was on, it was called Mercury Base, and it was located in the South Canal region of Mars. And I was kind of when I first went in, I was in Scout class entry level, and I got taken into Ground Force Battalion for Mars Defense Force, MDF, and my particular division was called Mariner. So, and I even have my service number. So in this particular division, like I said, I was underground first battalion, but I was in the corporate sector. So I would have people come into my office, all incoming recruits they would start with me, after they were doing their intake and everything, because I was going to be the person that would get them assigned to different various jobs. And I really didn't work with the super soldier population, anything like that. Those were people that were sent to special sector. Like I didn't really deal with special sector. If somebody came into my office that I felt needed to be referred out, I would definitely make a referral to something called like a special sector where they could be evaluated and things for different jobs. Because mainly the jobs that I was placing people in these particular jobs is they would be like mining, drilling, water treatment, waste treatment, agriculture. They even had an entertainment division. So we were putting people in those various jobs. So they would come in my office. I would spend probably sometimes up to an hour with them, and I would ask them like a battery of questions. But the questions just weren't to get the answers. I had to use my profiling ability. And so I was basically reading their energy by, you know, just the way their eyes look, their skin, their different body language, facial expressions. It was so much tied into, determining, where they would be best placed and where they'd be able to do the best work. And I'm sure they weren't thinking that they were going to come here. And so a lot of these, they used to only recruit out of, force and things like that. But now there's a lot of voluntary recruits currently with the military, and they say they're going, overseas and things, but they're not. They're actually going to Mars. So there's mainly voluntary recruits now. They're not particularly having to kidnap, children like they used to. But there are some, but now there's a lot more voluntary recruits. So, like I said, I would take them into my office and then I would make my recommendations and I would send them to the general. And the general I worked under was General Asher. And he had an office kind of close to mine. It was all glass and he had a secretary that sat out the front. Um, but when I remember this place, I don't, people think that if you're talking about Mars, you're thinking I was like fighting aliens and things like that. No, I don't remember. I only remember being in this one area and doing the same job every day. They wanted me to stay isolated. They didn't want me to connect with a lot of people because they felt like that it would skew kind of my results, based on my ability. They wanted it, they wanted me to stay the same. And I ended up actually being demoted because I couldn't stay the same. I was starting to have like bleed through memories, kind of like things, my programming was breaking down. And it mirrored that in my, earth life here. Like when I said about 6 years ago, I had a job where I was having anxiety, it was because I was having memories of a similar job somewhere else. And that's how it kind of bled through and how I started to recover a lot of the memories is because of that job, having a similar job. And that's crazy. So,
I have some more questions before we keep
yeah,
going.
sure.
So, for me, I've talked to several different people about different types of things like this, but I always wondered,
Hmm.
and I know I get asked questions about it because a lot of people don't believe it just because that's kind of what comes with the territory of this. But when you say you're working on Mars, I've had other
Hmm.
people say they've been in secret space programs and everything. Can you explain how that actually works to like the average person? Like, is it your consciousness that they're taking and moving off so in a different reality? Like, how does all that actually work?
For me, I remember my body being there. I remember being physically there. I don't remember a clone doing that work. I don't remember it, but I'm not, and I do remember when they did do the age regression to put us back, it was chemicals. It wasn't like aliens, doing something to our bodies. It was like a chemical process. And what is really strange is I remember, because since I was like in that corporate sector, I remember a huge stack of files that everybody signed when we called it retirement. When they left the program and they went back, they just called it retirement. They didn't know all the details, even though I knew a lot of it because I was in human resources. I knew more than, a lot of the other people. Because I was getting them to sign forms. That was my job. They had to sign forms before they left to retirement. And some of those forms were saying that they agreed to, and especially even me, I signed this form saying that I was coded for re-entry. That means when I was returned, they could use me at any time because I had signed for it. So it's you giving like a double consent without even knowing what you're doing. Imagine you go there and you're regressed and they already have stuff on file saying that you agreed to be used at any time once you're returned. It's really, and they do use people if they need somebody, depending on your location, depending on, your certain current situation, they will use you. And all they have to do is reactivate a certain part of your brain or an alter through various ways in order to use that piece of you. They can do that. And I remember seeing all the forms and nobody said no to the forms because you weren't allowed to anyways. There was no saying, no, I don't feel like signing this. That's not that. Even in the current military, you can't say no, no, thank you. I've never heard of anybody saying that. You can say no, thank you to that. So everybody signed these forms.
Forms, and it almost seems reminiscent to something I've heard before, like they called it 20 and back.
Yeah, it is. And that's how long I was there is about 20 years.
Okay.
And then when I had the age regression, like I said, they called it retirement. They didn't
Hmm.
say you're being age regressed and sent back home. They don't say that. They say you're finished with your term of service, you're being retired. And that's how we knew it as retirement. And like I said, there's forms signed. You consent to be monitored and controlled your entire life. You literally consent to that. And you consent to saying, I will do all this, and if I don't do it correctly, and they said you will result in termination. But termination doesn't mean lose your job. Termination means real termination. We sign that. We consent to it. And it's crazy and what I know is these forms, from what I know, they hold up in all courts. So that's earthly courts, galactic, all of it. You can put these forms that they have, you can put them up in any court and they say they'll stand up. They'll stand in any court.
If you were physically gone for 20 years,
Hmm.
how does that explain to people that know who you are? Like where you've been at and everything? How does that work?
Because they return you to a predestined state. So if I was gone, they'll just return me to that same day that they took me.
That's where it gets
Eh,
confusing at, because it's like time
mhm.
control, manipulation, and everything. And when you're able to control time and send people through and out of time, it's like, what is the
But
point?
we all can control time. I myself, you even, I control time when I'm going under hypnosis and astral traveling and going in other states of consciousness and reaching other places and other realms. That's insane to me that I can do that. That's controlling time. Just one person in her bed doing that. So if I can do that, imagine what these people with all the money, all the power, all the connections, and all the technology they want can do. Imagine what they can do. If I can just do that just by laying in my bed.
That's the one thing like I struggle with is
Hmm.
the whole aspect of time and coming in and out of time. Like for me, I just feel like if we're able to control time, I don't know why we're secretive about it at this point. I understand like why they're secretive and to the
Hmm.
extent, but like I don't see why we're doing the things we're doing because at this point they're basically being God. Like
From what I know, it's power and conquest rules. And it's all these different factions fighting for power and conquest. And we're just like kind of like the people, that are being affected by their wars. They're fighting each other for power, and we're just being affected by it.
wouldn't it create a paradox though that at one point they could send someone back in time and wipe out somebody else that was doing something else, so therefore it's like a butterfly effect?
I'm not quite sure. I don't remember ever doing any type of time travel or anything like that. Like I said, I was used for very um practical reasons. In my opinion, practical reasons, like, intelligence work, corporate espionage, human resources, corporate work. So it's very different from other people talking about doing 20 and backs when they're fighting, being in this huge military groups and fighting aliens and stuff. I didn't do that. So it's different for me to think about, did I see a lot of weird things? Of course. Did I see people, did I make people sign, documents for augments and things like that? Of course, I had to do that. They did sign that because I worked on a medical satellite station for a while, and I was kind of like what they consider like a medical social worker. So if there was somebody that was assigned there to have like something augmented in their body or something, I had to, kind of convince them to sign the papers because consent is very big in these programs, and people don't believe that, but it was. We had people sign everything. Because if you're forced to consent, they can always fall back on that. Well, you signed this paper. And that's a problem we have here on Earth, people signing things and you don't know what you're signing a lot of the time. Have you ever seen those long documents that somebody sets in front of you and all you do is switch to the end and sign it just so you don't
Hmm.
have to read it all? That's a similar thing that they're doing. And like I said, I never saw time travel. I never participated in that. But just from my own personal experience, what I can do now, I can see how easily time can be manipulated. If I can see into other places that other people can't see, how is that, how am I able to do that, and imagine what they can do, you know?
Yeah. Well, we can keep on going into it. That's just something that
Hmm.
always, every time I talk with someone about this, like when it comes to the concept of time, I always just feel like if they're able to control time, at one point someone's going to go back in time, which would be maybe that's why we have Mandela effects. I don't know. But
And
like,
I go back in time, like, and if I'm under hypnosis, it is a form of time travel. If I'm able to go back and see myself in the 1800s. And I'm not just, looking at it, I'm interacting with that time period. I'm able to sometimes even speak with those, you know, beings, those people, whatever. How is, to me, it blows my mind to think when I do that stuff, it's like, isn't this kind of like time travel? But, I don't really call it that. I always say that I'm traversing the outer realms. That's my particular words I use for it. I say traversing the outer realms because I don't know how to describe it. And I necessarily wouldn't call it anything like time travel. But in a way, it's similar. If you're able to go somewhere, then, it pretty much is what I'm doing.
mhm. Okay, well, you can pick up from where we kind of
Okay.
left off at.
So that I ended up doing that human resources work for a long time, and I ended up getting demoted because I was having breakthrough memories and kind of like bleed through memories. And it really messed me up. I couldn't do the work I was doing. I was acting very erratic, very emotional, unstable. And in these particular positions in these programs, you're not allowed to have emotion. None of us really had real emotions. We didn't know emotion was, and from what I know now, I was probably depressed, but we didn't have a word for it. There was no option to be depressed. So I didn't really know what was wrong with me. And I guess they must have figured that my programming was breaking down or something. So they demoted me and I was doing crazy things. Like I was trying to search the general that I work for. I was trying to search his office, looking through his drawers just because I knew something was wrong and I just couldn't figure out what it was, but I knew it. Same thing in this when this current life, I knew something was wrong and something pushed me to try to find out. It was the same. It was like mirroring each other, like bleed through. It really was a bleed through. So I ended up getting demoted. I ended up working just for um the as a ship liaison when the ships would come in with cargo and things like that and just signing off on ships. And I ended up getting retired after 20 years and returned, but like I said, coded for reentry. So the last time I remember being, physically taken in this, you know, current life is I think I was in my mid 30s and I was at home and I was, just having a normal day. I was getting ready to go to sleep. And I remember I don't know what happened, but I opened my eyes and I woke up and I was like in the basement of this huge house. It was huge, massive house. It was like this huge mansion. And you just know what to do. We wake up and your brain knows what to do. I woke up and I knew I had to get two kids out of the house. And when I looked down at my body, I had on basketball shorts and a tank top. I had no shoes on. So that's not really ideal for a job. And these two children, they weren't dressed properly either, and they had no shoes either. So I had to get two children out with no weapons, not knowing really what I'm doing. It was very stressful. So I took the kids with me and I just told them, follow me. And I was going through all these different rooms and it was like a room, just a long hallway of bedrooms. So I wasn't really finding anything that would be a viable kind of weapon. I mean, it was just nothing that I could use. And I finally looked and I found an office, and in the office of this, it looked like a man's office. He had like a retirement gift, and it was like a knife with I don't really know what this is, but a knife with all these different attachments on it. So it looked like a retirement gift because it said something, kind of like on the outside. So I grabbed that and we had to search through this whole house. This house was so huge, it had a basketball court in it. So finally, we were able to find like what I think is thought was the garage door. And so I opened the garage door, and as soon as I opened it, I saw there was a woman there, and she so detailed about seeing her. I can still see, the lines in her face. And even now, I can even think about it. I can see the lines in her face and how the makeup was settling in the lines. That's how detailed the memory was. That's how detailed it gets. Sometimes when you have these memory pulled from your subconscious, that's how detailed it is. So I saw her and she was immediately going to go for her keys and her phone and everything. And she had groceries in her hand and she dropped everything and went for it. And I just had to put the knife to her throat so she couldn't have a chance. And I just, give me your keys kind of thing. And she didn't fight me and she was bigger than me. She didn't fight me. She didn't say a word. She handed the keys over and I took the kids and it was this black SUV and I just left. And I don't know what happened after that. I know I was tasked to bring it back to the people who started the job and that was it. And that was I when I physically remember being taken. Like when I woke up, I snapped back my eyes back open and I was back at home on the couch and I was wearing different clothes. And I opened my eyes and I definitely remembered the whole experience. But at that time, I thought I was probably going nuts because how can I remember this? It's not possible. So at that time, I thought I was going a little bit crazy. So that's kind of how some of the things got, you know, how I got introduced into this whole idea of living kind of like a different life and learning about my abilities, learning about MK Ultra, and what is so interesting is a lot of the information about my parents, it's definitely verifiable. If somebody were to look it up, it's there to find. So it's not like, a lot of my story isn't able to be validated. It is. So, and like I said, I record everything I do when I'm doing hypnotic regressions. It's all recorded. I have witnesses to all the things I said and all the things that's happened during, a hypnotic regression and things like that. So, I mean, do you want me to talk about things like what happened in regressions or what kind of direction you want me to go into?
I'm cool with whatever you want to talk about, but I did have some questions regarding like when you do these things. You said you've interacted with different types of beings and everything. What are
Yes.
some of the ones that you've interacted with?
Do you want names of people or?
I'll, I don't really need the names, but I'm more curious, like if
Well,
it,
it's more like names of like demons. They're demonic names.
that's kind of where I'm a little taboo about that. So I don't really want to
Okay,
name drop them just because some of the listeners that I do have,
gotcha.
I don't want them freaking out if they're hearing names because in some forms of religion, if you say their names, it's not
Yeah.
really, so I don't want to make it too taboo,
Okay,
but
not too much of the occult. Okay.
we can talk
That
about the occult. I just don't want to name drop them.
okay. So, and that's a good point because when I first started doing this and I started to hear a word in my head and it was playing in triple, like I was hearing the same word and they said it 3 times over and over in my head. And I had no idea where that came from. And I didn't know what it meant until I looked it up and I saw, and I was like, oh, this is figures of the stuff I can do. This is somebody trying to reach out to me and tell me what their name is. So that's a good point when you're talking about names, because that's how they reach out to you in a way. In this particular one, that's how he reached out to me is by saying this name three times, saying his name 3 times in my head. And that's his particular call or signal. So what I was going to say is that they were starting to, there's a particular agency called Monarch Solutions, and they have like a catalog of services. And I had to get forced to work for them for a while. And what they're doing is they're kind of contracting people out that can do things like I can do, like hosting. They're doing it for kind of like what I consider like elites or family groups. And some of these families, they've been doing this process since hundreds of years. And there was a particular family that they wanted me to work for a weekend. And these people, they wanted me to do something what is hosting their familiar. spirit, or they call it a daemon. They don't say demon, they say daemon. So how they do this is they'll pay this company to have me come there for a weekend, and I didn't get treated badly, but I knew what they wanted me to do. They wanted me to host, a spirit or an entity for them. And this particular entity, they had met in like the 1500s. It's something that had been brought down through the generations. And in the beginning, they thought that this, being connected to this entity is how they stayed rich and powerful, how they kept all their resources to themselves. But this entity told me that that's total lies. They have that stuff because they're born into it. He said that he has no bearing on how they maintain their riches. Like he doesn't know why they think that. So they would have me, and sometimes there was another person with me. They would have us, kind of, lay down. They start doing their thing, and it's not always like elaborate rituals or anything like that, because it's not needed for people to host. You don't, when people think that they're doing like all this high magic and things like that, I get it. And, there's a whole process, but people that can do hosting, we don't need to do all that. All I need to do is somebody to count me down, from maybe 20 to 1, and I can do it. So it's not like an elaborate ritual is needed, like, people think. It's really strange that people think that you have to do a ritual to call forth a being into this world, and it's not. All you need is a portal person, and that's what Dr. Green used to call me. He used to call me, say I was one of the portal people. So all you need is somebody that has like an internal portal, which I do. I'm more of like a receiver. There's other people that are kind of like expellers. They push their energy out. Mine is more like a pulling in of the energy in my area, which is the solar plexus. So we would do this where we would lay down and we get, ready to have this hosting. And what they wanted me to do is they wanted me to host their familiar daemon, and they wanted to have dinner with him. So that's what I did. I let this thing take over my body. And I remember when I tried to stand up, that my legs felt like they were 100 pounds each. Like I could barely walk. I was like trudging through mud, trying to get to the table where they had all this food set up. And I don't think that they anticipated, what it would look like to have, an ancient demonic spirit, eat dinner at a table. They thought it would be something elegant. I think it wasn't, because he eats like an animal, and I was just like, ripping and tearing food like an animal. And it wasn't anything like, I don't think it was the image that they got in their head of what an ancient being would do. And and this being was very kind of like not happy with what they were asking for, because they were asking questions like that you would ask like a psychic at a psychic fair, about their business, if their husband was cheating and things. And he was very upset. And the dark side has very strict hierarchy, and they have a very strict rule about respect and things like that. And he found that very disrespectful, that they called an ancient god to ask, for tricks, parlor tricks. He said, "You called me down here for parlor tricks," kind of. And some of these people are trying to, make what they consider moon children, or children of the moon, they call them. If somebody is, having relations with somebody that's hosting, they feel like if there was how do I say it? If something were to come out of that, a particular sexual interaction, they believe that product is part of a demonic bloodline, something like that. So they're trying to create their own army of antichrists in that way. So, and that's something that they still do, and they still purchase that kind of thing. And there are people that can do it. It's not just me. There are other people that are mediums that can do this kind of thing, that are kind of, either trained or had this brought out in them, or, they have fostered it themselves, something like that.
Now, some of these things that you've interacted with,
Hmm.
and they're speaking through you. So,
Yes.
do do you understand, like, do you see what they see? Like, do you have their memories at that time, or are you only
You're,
able just to?
I'm in their head, they're in mine.
Okay.
And it's a real merging of energies. Sometimes when they take over my body, I like to step aside and lay down and take a rest. But there is never a time where if I felt any type of threat, my higher self can, kind of push through and speak, because I've done it a lot of times. if there was something, and usually it's only in interactions with, human handlers that I was, hey, I will bust through. My higher self will kind of smash through and say, hey, these guys are up to no good, in that, not in such a nice way I say that, but I say these guys are up to no good. Just be careful of these people. Or if I've had one entity that I did two. I try to warn people about because usually I don't really have a bad experience until, unless they say something where I'm kind of like, well, yeah, they have really deceived people, you know, so there's a couple of them that people think they've kind of made a resurgence and they're a female one, and people are getting tattoos of this particular one. They consider themselves reincarnation of this goddess. They think it's a goddess. And she told me, she's like, she wanted to thank everyone. She said, thank you for bringing me back to life. Because these particular entities, they feel like they're dying out. They feel like, because they consider themselves a race of beings. They say our race is dying out because nobody is here to worship us. Nobody is following us anymore because they think that, we have found new gods in this particular, lifetime. We have found new gods to worship, gods of money and, things like that. We worship other things besides the old gods. So they feel like they're dying, but this particular being, she considers herself a goddess. And she did tell me, she's like, yeah, I am. She thinks that people think she's an angel. She's like, I am an angel, but I'm an angel of darkness. And she wanted to thank everybody for bringing her life again by speaking about her, by showing images of her and things like that. They're making her live again.
I do have another question regarding that. You said an angel of
hmm
darkness.
hmm
These beings, where are they from? And I don't want to go in like to the religious aspect of it or
hmm
anything like that, but like when people talk about demons, obviously, then you have to talk about angels. And then if you talk about that, you have to talk about God. Then it's almost like the whole Christianity or Judea.
hmm And
But
I'm not religious, so I don't want anybody to think that I'm subscribing to religion. I'm not a religious person. I don't believe in organized religion. And I don't know why certain beings choose me as a messenger if I'm not even religious. It's interesting to me too.
yeah, because I'm like where you are. Like I grew up in a very
hmm
Christian home, but I don't practice organized religion. I have my own beliefs. But for me,
Same,
it's
same. I don't believe in it. Yeah, I don't believe in organized religion.
like I think there are definitely higher powers and beings and stuff like that, but I don't know. I don't condone to what man tells me to do,
Same
basically.
with me. That's why I use my own experience when people say something's evil, and I'm like, well, in my personal experience, I've, interacted with these, certain beings, and they didn't really, and I hate to say this, and I don't want to scare anybody, but when I'm hosting a darker entity and in the light one, I don't really feel that different on the inside. I don't feel, once people think, oh, I have, positive energy or dark energy, I don't feel that is energy. And it's letting it take over my body. I don't feel like one is dark and one is light. I've never felt that. So
What determines
it's really
which one's
interesting.
light and which one's dark? Like that's where
I,
it's
for me, it's not going to be the same as other people because, like I said, I've become very conflicted in the fact that humans are the ones doing so much wrong to this earth. And, I'm getting a lot of really important information from darker entities. They're telling me things. They've been able to give me information on, different programs and things using their all-seeing information. And that to me is conflicting. So, I don't really have an answer to that because I wouldn't be the person, because I wouldn't consider them evil. Knowing a lot of them, meeting them and they even said that I'm one of their kindred spirits, kind of because of how what I was in a past life. That's why they don't harm me. That's why they don't, almost like protective spirits in a way. They say they're here, they won't let anything happen to me. So to me, it's hard for me to grasp that because, and especially not being religious, I can't say something is dark or light because I don't even, think in those terms.
yeah, for me it's like I feel like there are I don't want to say misunderstood. I'm not trying to be like an
Yes.
apologist to any sort of side, But I think there's a lot of misconceptions between what's really good and what's really not good, and darkness, lightness. I've said this a few times here recently on other episodes. A lot of people say that we are light beings, like,
Hmm.
but I think a lot of people are dirt bags.
Yeah.
So we,
And how do we deal with that when I say I'm inside myself a dark entity and then I'm a good person in this life? How do I explain that to people? You know what I mean? And I've come across people, I definitely, because I talk about my reincarnation a lot, and there are literally people that said they've never done anything bad in any past lives. People have literally said that. They've already said, they say, I've been good every life. And I'm like, well, I think you might want to think about that. Because do you think in this lifetime, who I am, do you think I would have thought that I was a dark entity before? Never. That would have never crossed my imagination in any way. But it was a huge wake-up call for me to see that there's so much that we haven't even become aware of yet because we're afraid to, look into that other parts of ourselves.
I don't know how the average person would be able to do that. Is there a way that they could?
A lot of it is even just meditating. Even getting to a point where you're reaching that meditative state. I did a lot of practice like that on my own, just meditating. And of course, when I first started doing it, I had a lot of V2K experiences because whatever was trying to control me knew that I was getting close to something very special. And they would always send me a mental message, if you come any close. I remember this exact phrase when and there was no other way for me this to happen. There was nothing around, no phones, no nothing. It was me meditating in my own bed during the day, and it said, if you come any closer, we're going to take everything from you. They literally told me that. So it was a real threat to say, to stop talking about this, stop searching, stop looking into this, stop telling people what you can say, what you can do and what you found. That's not something they want out, you know, to people to know, because I see how it can affect people because me being able to do this, it has dropped a lot of fear away from me. Fear that I had of like the dark and the dark side and evil. I was terrified. And a lot of that fear has kind of dissipated. Imagine if a lot of other people were able to drop that fear, what then? What about all the people that are trying to keep us in that fear state? What's going to happen then if a lot of us drop the fear, of these things and not being controlled by it? It's I can't even imagine what could happen.
Yeah. I don't know. It's a very taboo subject, especially for people that are super religious, because
Hmm.
when you
It
talk
is.
about things like this and you're conversing with demons, they're manipulative, they're evil, they're obviously going to tell you
Hmm.
things just to try and get your soul and all sorts of things, which I don't know.
And I understand their ideas. I understand what they're saying, but that has not been my experience. And like I said, they are not the only people that I have hosted. Like recently, I just hosted, it was a couple months ago, Jesus and his mother Mary. And like I said, I'm not religious. So to have them come through and give me the most detailed information about the crucifixion, about what happened to her during the day of his crucifixion. It was mind blowing. I'm not even religious, and I was mind blown about what had happened that day and what he saw. And he said that when he was up on the cross, he said in doing that, he wanted to show the world what he can do, and that he also wanted to show us we could do by leaving the physicality of the body behind. That is not the real you. There's so much more to this world. So, I mean, imagine getting messages like this, and it's really conflicting to me. And why would they choose me? If I'm evil and if I'm talking demonic entities, why would they choose me to give this amazing information? And a lot of this is in my book. So I put it in there. I put the whole conversation with Jesus and the whole conversation with Mary, which was my favorite, one of my favorite things I've ever done, just because of the fact that I had never heard this is not information that you can hear other people talk about it. You don't find it in any book. This is straight from them. In my opinion, in my experience, it was straight from them.
I kind of already asked it again though, but like
Hmm.
they could say they're Jesus,
Hmm.
but how are you 100% certain it was?
I'm 100% in my soul
Hmm.
what I know is right. Other people, they would have to, I believe that in order for them to really, 100% believe, they would have to be doing what I do and sit in my seat, and experience what I experience to get the full picture of what it would be like to have something as big as that inside your body speaking. They won't know until they can experience it. Just like any other, medium they get the same backlash. It's not, I'm used to it. So it's not gonna hurt my feelings when people say, that I'm lying or whatever. I don't care. I'm just trying to do what I was told to do. And my own dead father told me to do this. He told me to burn the system down. And he was very serious. He said, go out there and tell everybody what they did and what they made us do. And that's kind of how I stay true to this whole thing that I'm doing by writing these books and getting this information out that I've obtained and taken a huge risk to get to people. And all they want to do is, kind of focus on, oh, she's evil, she's talking to demons. You don't see all the information I've gotten about these programs, about tortured children, and giving it to the world. I'm taking a huge risk doing this. I take a huge risk every time I remote view bases and try to remote view documents for people. That's a huge risk to myself in order to help the world and get them the information because I'm staying true to what my father told me to do.
Yeah. I was more or less not so much them saying you're lying, but like the beings themselves lying, saying they're something else.
I guess that's in people's own belief systems. That's their religious belief systems. That's not in my belief system or in my experience. So they have to, you know, deal with their own beliefs in terms of how they feel. And if it's not for them, it's not for them. I don't have any harsh feelings about that if they don't want to listen to the information. But it's there for people to look at and to, see what's being said at least.
Hmm. Yeah, I just know, like, again, if you listen to religious types of people, like a demon's going to lie to you. So it's going to tell you things that it's going to impersonate whoever. It's going to make you think it's good. Like, I understand how that works because
Hmm.
that's how I was raised. So I
I understand
understand.
too. Yeah, I understand too, but I'm not afraid of that, and I'm not afraid of hearing them fake, because why would they fake when I am one of them? Why do they need to fake to me? I'm one of them. I'm one of their people. And that's why I've created such a huge connection with them. It's because in a past life, I was one of them. They tell me that too. They said, that's why we're connected, because you are one of us. So I can't, and I never lie about it. I try to stay as authentic as I can by telling that story that I was one of them. And that's how I make this connection with them. And that's why I know they're not lying to me. Because why would they need to lie to one of their own people? If it's one of you guys, okay, maybe they want to lie to you, but I don't, and I've never heard any, really, I haven't heard a lot of lies from them. I hear a lot of lies from humans, but not necessarily them.
I know it for just in general, like
Hmm.
you're 100% correct with the human aspect. A lot of people are liars and don't do good things and manipulative. That's just human nature, and it kind of makes me
Hmm.
go back to wonder why we are the way we are, which there is no real rhyme or reason as to that. Everyone has their own choice of what they try to do. I think I try to do good in the world, but maybe to someone else I don't. I
It's a
don't
lot
know.
of it's based on perspective. It's based
Right.
on perception and what you consider good and what you consider evil. And people in their own selves had to figure out what they can. And I'm not trying to tell anybody what to consider good and evil. I'm saying this is my experience, and what I've experienced is going to be different from other people because of my abilities and what I've been able to obtain with it. Not a lot of people can travel as far as I've gone. They just can't. And I wouldn't want them to because it's a risk. So I'm taking the risk for other people to get the information. But I totally understand if somebody's afraid of it because I've been doing this for a few years now and I hear it all the time about what they think kind of person I am, just based on the fact that I'm a medium and I'm able to get information. I totally get it.
Would you claim you said you're one of them? So if
Hmm.
someone said you're a dark entity, would that
It's true.
be?
It's true because it's in my cellular level. It was me in a past life, and I can't delete it or eliminate it. no more than anybody else can delete one of their past lives. If somebody knows how to delete a past life, please let me know. I've never heard of anybody being able to delete a past life or eliminate it. And why would I want to? It was an experience that I needed to figure out, you know, what darkness was. And even in that stage, she thought she was doing something for good for people because they called out to the darkness. And she's right. When I was Harlowing, people did call out to this, and they still do call out to the darkness. Still. And my father even called out to the darkness. He told me that when he was young, he called out to the darkness for protection. So people are still doing this. When I was a demonic entity, we called it a heart call. We called it the beckoning. That's the word they use, the beckoning, when somebody calls forth an ancient god. And we don't call ourselves demons. We never did. We called ourselves gods. So when people are thinking about, the current demonic entities, these are what they used to call gods in ancient times. In ancient times, we were called gods. So it's kind of shifted based on, current times and time frames, culture, everything, subcultures. You got to see how powerful culture is too, and how it's shifted the words and the images of what we use to describe these beings.
Right. I think you actually gave me an idea to use for the name of this episode. So, but is there anything else you'd like to discuss before we try to wrap this up? I know you have the books and everything, so I want you to let
Oh yeah,
everyone
we
know.
can definitely wrap up. Both of my books are on Amazon, and please, if anybody has any questions, if they want to discuss anything, you can find me on TikTok on Olivia James the Gray Mouse. So if you read the book and you have any questions, just reach out to me and we can discuss it. No problem.
Are your books available on Amazon?
Yes, they're both on Amazon.
Okay, I will make sure to send me I do this a lot. I tell people to send me links so I can put it in the show notes, and then the episodes come out. There's no links in the show notes, and everyone's like, "He's not putting links." I just don't ever get them sent to me.
No, I'll
So
send it to you, no problem.
I was like, I don't have the time to go and search for things because I do 800 different things a day. So I'm also forgetful, so I forget to go look for the stuff. So if you send it to me, I'll make sure to put it in there for everyone.
Okay, sounds great.
But no, I appreciate you coming on here tonight and talking with me. It's been
Yeah, thank you.
a lot to take in, a lot to think about. So
Yeah, it's different. It's definitely different information.
you're the first time I can say that I've interviewed a dark entity. So
Yeah, thank you. Nice to meet you as well.
it's I said this will be a taboo episode for some people, but
Yeah, and I get it. And like I said, that's why I offer if anybody want to discuss it, they can, you know, talk to me about the book. It's totally fine.
mhm.
But I think if they read the book, they'll kind of have because me talking about it is so different from having all the information in one spot to kind of flip through. I think if they actually read the entire book series and, saw, the beginning and the end of it and what is actually being said, it might, kind of work a little bit better that way rather than me just, jumping back and forth between stories.
Yeah. Well, we're going to wrap this one up. So I want to say thank you to Olivia and thank you to everyone
thank
that is
you.
listening. Yep. And I want you to have a good night, and everyone out there listening to have a good night too. We're going to wrap it up. So catch you on the next one.
All right, thank you.
And that's the show, everyone. I really hope you guys enjoyed the conversations. If you would like to be a guest on Tinfoil Tales, remember to send an email to tinfoiltalespodcast@gmail.com or go to the contact section of tinfoiltales.com. Just get your message to me. We'll get something scheduled for a future episode. And just remember, the truth lies in the stories we share, the connections we make. Stay curious, stay open-minded. Thank you all for joining us on this journey. And until next time, keep questioning, keep seeking, and keep exploring the unknown. Good night, everyone.
Tinfoil Tales in the headphones. Yeah, it's time to rock. Got a story about a cryptid creature. Let's take a walk. Bigfoot, dogman, they're out there in the dark. But the truth is out there like an alien spark. UFO sightings got the whole world shook. Conspiracies unfold like a story in a book. Media control, trying to keep us blind. But oh, before gonna use my whole mind. In history, they don't want us to know the secrets they're hiding, the truth they won't show. Dominate our society, they keep us in chains. control, trying to keep us blind. But I won't be fooled, gonna use my own mind. In history, they don't want us to know